Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series. My name is constant reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, an aging hawk that I'm going to throw at the face of my mentor, Matt Freeman. Matt, how's it going?
Oh, it's going pretty well. I'm just thrilled to be a part of this, and I'm more than happy to be sacrificed for your transient goal of defeating this guy. And then we're going to be friends forever after I do that, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the great thing is I didn't have to train you. I just treat you as my friend and then use you horribly. And everyone wins, really.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Yeah, you're great.
This week on the show, we will be finishing book 1 of the Dark Tower. We're finishing the Gunslinger this week. We're covering chapters 4, the Slow Mutants, and 5, the Gunslinger and the Man in Black. Roland and Jake make their way through the mountains hot on the heels of that Man in Black. While traveling through the darkness, Roland tells the tale of becoming a gunslinger to the silent and quite pissed off Jake. Then the moment we've all been dreading comes, and forced to choose between continuing on his quest and saving Jake, Roland lets the boy fall to his death. He palavers with the Man in Black, learning about the universe, the tower, the Man in Black himself, and where his quest will go from here. The beginning ended, Roland walks down the mountain, alone, and towards his quest. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
I mean, I think I said the same thing last week, but it's interesting to me how from chapter to chapter, I'm continually surprised at the twists and turns that the story takes. And I mean, we talked about this last week for sure, like the fact that it kind of like goes from one genre to another, and it kind of does it again in these chapters. And just overall, like I don't have a lot of faith in my ability to make predictions for this series, honestly, because I don't have any ability to really make predictions from week to week. Because I think this is something he's doing on purpose, though. I think he's playing with expectations. I think that's a big part of what he's doing with this book, actually. Yeah,
I mean, I think there's certainly some truth to that. I mean, one of the things that this is a short book, right? It's like 240 pages, I think, is the length of this book. It's very, very short. It's the shortest in the series by far. We're going to be spending a lot more time on the books from now on, but it is, because it's so short, I think it's like you think about where this book started, and you think about our conversation about chapter 1, where we were talking about, oh, look how much of a Western it is. He walks in the saloon, and you got the Batwing doors and the confrontation. Like, it's so Western. And then here, in these 2 chapters, they're on a minecart fighting mutant monsters, and then they get to like a subway station of like a poisoned out world. And then one entire chapter, the last chapter of this book, is literally just a long conversation with a magician in which Roland like sees the universe and learns like the secret of the world. It like the fact that we've come so far in such a short amount of time through the genre is remarkable.
Right. If I think I would not have anticipated that we would get this long metaphysical speech from the Man in Black if you asked me at the beginning of this book. And I mean, when I say he's playing with expectations, like he's clearly injecting like prophecy. He's injecting these kind of ambiguous statements about the past and leading you to imagine either what happened in the past or what's going to happen in the future of the story, but he's never giving you enough information to really figure it out. And so I think that's the most like obvious and sort of textual way in which he's playing with expectation. But I think just in general, like it's all, because I've only read a couple of other King books, but those were like fairly normal storytelling stories, right? This book, I think he's playing with storytelling and defying tropes in ways that are just constantly surprising and violating of expectations.
Yeah, I think you're right there. And I think one of the ways which he violates expectations so much is toying with the reader on the whole Jake situation. We're going to talk a lot about that this week, that like we eventually get to the moment that we all expected. Like, it was so laid down for us that this was going to be the choice that Roland made. And still, even up to the moment of the choice, you're still not 100% convinced. You're still hopeful that maybe it'll go a different way. And it's like subverting expectations by upholding expectations.
Yeah. Well, it's like the expectation is of course your protagonist isn't going to do that.
Yeah.
But of course the book is going to make you think that he's going to do that, but he's not going to actually do that.
Right. Yeah.
So that, I mean, and that's exactly another example of him being fully aware of what tropes he's invoking and then slapping you upside the head.
Sure. Yeah. Well, let's get right into that and get to that moment and talk about it, because we're going to have a lot to say. But first, we have to start at the very beginning of chapter 4, the Slow Mutants. Lots to say about this chapter in general. I want to kind of, when we get to the mutants themselves, I want to talk about the chapter title, because like a lot of big things happen in this chapter, and the mutants are not that important part of it. Like, it's like a thing that happens, but it is not the most important event of the chapter.
It's almost a distraction.
Yeah.
I agree that's interesting.
All right, so we open up this week's reading with our characters lost in the dark gloom of the mountain tunnel. Jake is silent, but Roland talked hectically, feverishly, to fill the space. He's desperate for things between him and the boy to return as they were before, desperate for the love and admiration of Jake, but Jake is done with him. He's giving him none of it. It's a really awkward opening, Matt. Like when you say goodbye to someone in a parking lot and realize that you're both walking the same direction. Like Roland has made his choice. He's made his choice. He uncoupled himself from Jake last chapter, and like so he's just the boy now. But now like they're stuck together, just like waiting for the actual sacrificial moment to happen.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's just me, but I'm so conditioned to like books that I just couldn't believe that he was going to go through with it, you know?
Yeah.
Like, because like we were talking about a second ago, it spends so much of this first part of the chapter showing Roland's inner conflict and gradually bringing him to a place where he like you feel like, oh, okay, the book is bringing him to a place where he's gonna save Jake.
Mm-hmm.
He's so full of conflict. He's remembering all these reminiscences of his past. We're getting him to the point where he decides he's going to save Jake. And you can laugh at me and say I should have known better, but like the thing is, you can easily imagine the story progressing either way. Like you can imagine a story where he does save Jake, and then your character is like the guy who has thrown away his quest in order to save this kid, and now you know, now where do things lie? And that's an interesting story too. But of course, that's not what happens. But like it's not. I don't know. It's just. We're gonna obviously this is what we're gonna be dwelling on pretty much this whole conversation. Is this idea that he can't just let the kid die. obviously,
yeah.
But yeah.
But of course he does. He does. And yeah, I mean, I love this. Like one of the things that I think in this chapter, especially, we see kind of a different side of Roland. Like Roland has been like the quiet, like just moody person this entire time, and now he's like that quote I read to you was a quote directly from the book. Talked hectically, feverishly to fill the silence. Like he's desperate to just make, like he made this choice, he did this uncoupling, and he's like desperate to make it okay. And Jake is not like obliging him in any of that. He's not like allowing him to feel not guilty about this anymore. Like. And he hasn't even like done the act yet. It's just the idea of agreeing to go forward with the act. I love it.
Yeah, it'll be fun to talk about Jake as a character specifically as we go into this chapter.
Yeah. All right. So one of the things Roland is speaking about as he talks feverishly is his time back in Gilead. He's looking back to the past again, where he and his friends sneak into the Western Hall to witness what he calls the Sewing Night Cotillion. There, they see Martin, Stephen Deschain's magician and chief advisor, with Roland's mother. They're dancing. And it's this really obviously important moment to Roland that one of the reasons he's recalling it right now. Because he describes it as his father being cuckolded, and like a power was passed in this moment. Like this is the moment in which she was hypnotized or entranced by him that leads to his father's destruction. And it's obviously like really big deal to him, because he's like chanting at one point, like, I remember how they danced. And like, Jake didn't ask about this story. He's just going into it as something to fill the silence, and he just finds himself back in this all important moment to him. Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch to say about this section, right? Like why tell the story in the first place is the first thing, right? Because Jake didn't ask for this, like you said. Why is this relevant? And it's like superficially, it's a story about like light, and they're walking into the darkness.
I think that's kind of an interesting level. But also, I think the reason Roland brings it up, my take is that he's trying to justify himself, but he's doing it in a way that Jake can't possibly understand because Jake doesn't really understand the meaning of or the context of all this. And actually, kind of, we don't really either. I think it's only by the end of the book that we actually kind of get how this is connected to anything at all. At this point, we're like, well, okay, what? Huh?
Yeah.
Because he's like you said, he's telling the story about what he sees as his father's cuckoldry, and for him, it's this memory of beauty, but also incredible shame. And I think we're setting up what probably happened between Roland and his mother, and we'll see more of this later that'll put that into more clarity. But basically, I think this shame and then the subsequent trauma messed Roland up so badly that I think this scene of just seeing him, his mom, and the man in black dancing is a big part of what he feels to be his justification or his motivation for what he's doing. And Jake's just sitting here like, okay, good story.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, and we learn a little bit later that Martin was having an affair. It seems like, I don't think it directly states it, but it's very strongly implied that he's having an affair with Roland's mother. And it is the learning of that affair that like sets him on his path. Like it causes him to test the line 2 years earlier than anyone ever had. It like sets in motion this drive of Roland to seek, it's not revenge, but it kind of is as well, like against the Martin, who we will learn is the man in black. It's a little confusing at the end of the book, and the reason it's confusing is because I this isn't a spoiler. When King first wrote this book, he saw Walter O'Dim as a separate person from Martin, and then he changed his mind, and they're the same person. So that the change in this book where he says, "No, I'm the same person. That was always me," is part of the revised version. But so it's the same guy, kind of weirdness, but like you kind of understand maybe in his head why this is driving him forward on this quest, right? Why he's trying to chase after this guy. Like this guy, like embarrassed me and cuckolded my father and embarrassed the kingdom, and maybe had some part in the fall of the city, and it's driven him forward. So yeah, I totally agree that has this kind of justification here.
Yeah, there's this thing that I'm reading into it, which may not really be intended, but I've sort of pegged, and this is mostly based on the way that Roland's dad responded to him turning in the cook to be executed. I think that this is like an honor culture, like a real hardcore honor culture.
Yeah.
Where your personal honor is way more important than anything else. And so the idea that his dad was cuckolded and he's ashamed by this is like cripplingly important, right?
Yeah.
It's more important than good and evil and right and wrong, right? And this is his psychology. And when you view his whole character through this lens of being somebody from an honor culture, other things start to click into place. Like, I mean, the idea that morality is beyond him, but he still wants to set things right. Well, he's sort of going by a different kind of compass than most people, where it's more to do with his own personal sense of honor, which we don't fully know what it looks like yet.
Sure.
But yeah.
And one of the interesting things I think is that like we learn by the end of this section that Roland's quest is for the tower, not necessarily for Walter, for Martin. And so it's kind of, we have this open question here. It was like, well, if what Walter O'Dim did to your world, did to your family, did to your country, if what he did is your inspiration for driving you forward onto this quest, why are you going towards the tower? It seems like the thing you want more is Walter to give you information, not to get him, to get revenge, to fix that, like that blemish on your honor, right? So it's like there's a lot of unanswered questions here, and we're definitely jumping ahead of ourselves. But I agree with you that the reason why the story is coming up is because he is in his head trying to justify the decision he made, and he's doing it through a story that there's no way Jake can absolutely understand at all.
It is interesting that we're jumping ahead, because I didn't expect necessarily that we would feel the need to jump ahead here, but it just highlights how interwoven all these ideas are with each other. Because we're going to talk about a lot of the stuff as it comes up.
Yeah.
But interestingly, so much of what comes up later is kind of embedded in this story, which is really nothing more than a guy danced with his mom at a dance.
Yeah. And I love it describes what Roland's face looks like as he tells the story. And I just love the writing here. His face, had there been a stronger light to illumine it, would have shown harshness and sorrow, the purest kind of condemnation. His essential force had not been cut or diluted by the passage of years. The lack of imagination that still remained in that face was remarkable. I just love that last sentence, especially. Like the way this book describes Roland is so interesting to me. He's dumb. He's slow. He has a lack of imagination. It describes him as plodding along. Like, it's so fascinating to me that like this hero character is described. I think later in the book, Walter says, there is no one like you in all the world because of the way your brain moves so slow. It's just like, it's just a fascinating way to describe the hero, the protagonist of your entire multi-book series.
It really is an interesting sentence, that the lack of imagination, because I mean, if you think about like if somebody wronged you like 15 years ago, it's usually pretty hard to maintain a good, well kept hatred of that person, right?
Because time eventually softens those feelings.
Time softens it, and like the idea that like imagination is involved in like that, like you like maybe you imagine that there were reasons why they did that, or you imagine what it was like to be them that led them into that situation, or you imagine that all kinds of interesting applications of the concept of imagination toward the process of getting over something. And Roland's, like, the way the text portrays it, it's like he's just in exactly the same mental place that he was that day, basically. Yeah,
totally. I love it. It's such good writing. Yeah. So Roland sleeps, and then we see Jake was only pretending to sleep, and he actually just wakes up and is just staring at Roland. And the text describes it as in both sickness and love, which is just wonderful. I also love, like, he's so mistrusting of the gunslinger now. Like, he's like watching him in his sleep. And King's imagery in this opening section is so good. And we have these two separate instances where light is captured in Jake's face and then it slowly fades. As he's sitting here watching Roland, it says the last light of the fire caught in one pupil for a moment and was drowned there. And then earlier, as they were like walking into the tunnel for the first time, Roland refuses to look back at the light. He's only seeing how the light's disappearing by seeing it in the reflection off of Jake's cheek. And he sees how it goes from now faint rose, now milk glass, now pallid silver, now the last Dutch glow touch of evening, now nothing. So just in case you were wondering how hopeful you should be for Jake's future, his face is literally where the light dies.
Yeah. It's I mean, the book is doing everything it can to tell you that Jake's dead, right?
Yep.
And you're still like, nah, I don't think you're gonna do it, book.
Yeah.
I dare you, book. Serves us right, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm afraid I'm gonna have to continue Lord of the Rings Watch 2020 and mention that, okay, they're traveling under a mountain and then they run into some monsters, and then they exit the mountain over a narrow bridge, and one of them falls from the bridge. Okay, it's the Mines of Moria. They even find the dead bodies of the tunnel's occupants. The bridge of Khazad-dûm is where somebody falls. The Balrog is Roland's mad obsession with the quest. And Jake is Gandalf, of course. And as you'll recall, that was definitely the last we saw of Gandalf.
Oh, is that a prediction here?
When he fell off that bridge. I think it's a prediction. Yeah, you gotta swing.
Yeah, you
swing
do.
That bat.
You do gotta swing. Yeah. You know, the funny thing about this to me is, I introduced this concept of this is Stephen King's Lord of the Rings, and I personally had never thought more about it beyond just like Stephen King really liked Lord of the Rings and wanted to make his own epic fantasy series, and then that was done. And then you're continually finding these wonderful connections, whether intentional by King or not, that just work. I think you're spot on here. This is 100% Moria.
Yeah, I mean, I think how often do you actually have to travel under a mountain to do anything?
True.
And then the idea of like a narrow bridge at the end of it, it's like, Yeah, okay. I when I first thought of it, I kind of chuckled to myself, and then I thought about it for 5 more minutes and was like, "Oh my god, that's exactly what this is."
Yeah.
So,
It's to the point where I think it does seem intentional. Yeah.
yeah, I think so.
All right. So Jake, as they're wandering through the darkness, finds a railroad track in the middle of the tunnel, and then eventually an entire hand cart. The discovery makes Roland remember other remnants from the gone world that he describes, and he goes on like a little tangent about this. I've never actually said the name of this company out loud. Amico, thank you. Amico gasoline pump that an old hermit preached at. And for you youngins out there, Amico was a gas company back on our Earth, but they were purchased by BP in 1998, so that's why they're not around anymore.
Yeah, people our age probably remember Amico existing. I certainly do.
I do too, yeah.
But it's funny to me the younger readers might just assume that this is like a neologism standing in for big oil company.
Because it sounds like it, doesn't it?
It does. So it's such a stereotypical oil company name. If, for some reason, though, this Amico reference feels more concrete than the reference to Hey Jude, like more pointed, like this is literally Amico, the big oil company. Like at least Hey Jude, you can imagine that it was like some distorted version of Hey Jude, maybe.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've seen this throughout this book, right? One of the things I forgot to bring up last week is the good man Farson has a quote that is basically JFK's quote, right? He said, "Ask not what you can do for the good man, or ask not what the good man can do for you, but what you can do for Farson," or something like that. It's the JFK quote, right? And that, and I agree with you. Hey Jude feel like, I don't know, like they could just be references, right? Like there's like it could just be a fun reference, but yeah, this is a gasoline pump by a gasoline company that at the time of this novel existed in our world, like right there. It is a working pump. Gasoline comes out of it. Like, yeah, I'm with you on that. It's very, very specific.
Yeah.
So what I find so interesting about all this, though, is once Roland and Jake move into the tunnel, it's almost as if they switch roles a little bit here. Jake can see better in the dark. He's the one that finds the railroad track. He's the one, well, they both just bump into the handcar, but he's the one that explains how the handcar works to Roland. Roland's like, doesn't know what the hell this thing is. He's the one staying up late at night and like watching Roland in the dark, not out of like protection, but out of distrust. And it's just like, it's so interesting that they're like, Roland was always like the confident, like I know where we're going. I know how to survive person. And now Jake has kind of taken over that role a little bit.
Yeah, it's cool to see. And it's not like Jake's character really changes. Yeah. It's just that his role changes.
Yeah.
And we see how he deals with fear and distrust, which we hadn't seen before. And I think that overall, it actually kind of makes us like him more because he knows what's happening. He knows what's going to happen, and he doesn't cry or beg. He remains functional, and while he's obviously terrified and very resentful, actually, he continues to be resourceful and just generally kind of admirable.
Yeah.
And we just kind of like him more and more as the story goes on.
Yeah, we do, which is just mean, Stephen.
Yeah.
It's just real mean.
It is.
I did notice on this read through that whatever gunslinger speech Jake had started to adapt before this moment where they enter in this passage under the mountain, it kind of is gone now. When he does talk, he talks much more like a person from New York. Like when we met him first at the way station, he could barely remember what TV was at that point. And he was losing more memories every day. He said, like, if you ask me tomorrow, I might not even remember. And now it's months. It's at least weeks later from that point. And he's like speaking of cartoons, and he's talking much more like Jake from New York City and much less like Jake, assistant to Gunslinger.
Yeah. I mean, my interpretation, like at the end of this book, is that Roland somehow crosses over into our world. So maybe this is because Jake is getting closer to that like portal or whatever, but maybe that's a bit too like plot thinky. I think maybe it's just that Jake he no longer wants to be like Roland, and so he's distancing himself from Roland.
Yeah.
I don't know why that would lead to him getting his memories back. So I don't know. Maybe it's both.
I mean, maybe it's just like a conscious effort to focus on that stuff. Like as he became more and more part and parcel of this world, he was letting that side of him go more. And now that Roland has uncoupled himself, Jake maybe has done his own kind of mental uncoupling and is losing that this attraction to this world. He doesn't like this place anymore.
Yeah. I mean, any of these I think work, and like I think emotionally that's how you feel. You feel him floating away from Roland, basically.
Yeah,
that's the main conclusion.
Yeah. So what do we think of this hand car that like offers encouragement and advertisements as they go along on it?
Well, it's a tiny shred of comic relief for one thing. Also, like, it's technology that probably didn't exist in the 80s. I don't actually remember. But it does seem like a hint that this is like from the future. And I wonder, like, if I'm getting too galaxy brain with some of this stuff, and that like the most straight, but like, I think the most straightforward, simple interpretation is that this is just literally the future. Like Roland and his world are the future. He's not going to our world because he's already in our world, just in the future of it. He's going to the past. I mean, I know that time is softening, but it's like, okay, what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's a nebulous enough of a concept where that could really literally mean whatever the author wants it to mean.
Yeah, I mean, it could mean that he is in the far future, but just crossing across like a desert then puts you in the past or something, right? So, yeah.
Sure, yeah. All right. So suddenly, without warning, Jake asks Roland to hear about his coming of age, the time where he fought Cort and earned his guns. Roland is weirdly hesitant about telling the story for a while. We'll discover why after we see the story that's being told. And he's going off on tangents about how he once saw a not man, someone invisible, hung once.
Yeah. It's phrased interestingly because we don't realize at first that I think Roland was the one who caught the not man, which sounds like a fun story.
Yeah. It's also funny to me that this world of like undead and demons and all this crazy shit going on would have no word for invisible.
Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah.
Also, like, I don't think we really know why Jake asked for this story.
We don't. No.
Yeah. It's like, why does this even occur to him?
I mean, the reason he gives is something to the effect of like, I think all adults are bullshit, and I want to see the moment you became an adult to see if you're just full of shit. Which I think makes sense because it actually does reveal something very important to Jake and to us.
Yeah, I mean, and also kind of like reaffirms Jake's opinion that the process of becoming an adult is the process of like committing some horrible deed that you can never come back from.
Yeah.
So
yeah. But I love this exchange as he's gone off on this tangent. He finally like reins himself back in and says, "That's a tale. The tale of the not man is a tale for another day, knowing there would be no other days. Both of them knowing there would be no others. 2 years after that, I left a girl at a place called Kingstown. Although I didn't want to." "Sure you did," the boy said, and the contempt in his voice was no less for the softness of his tone. "Got to catch up with that tower, am I right? Got to keep a riding, just like the cowboys on my dad's network." I love this. I love the venom that Jake has. Like you talked about, he's not whining, he's not begging for his life, but the venom he has for this person that previously he loved and loved him back is just so powerful.
Yeah, and part of what makes this so chilling is that Roland just kind of lets it slide. He just kind of takes Jake sneering at him because he knows Jake is right, even though it's undignified to just sit there and take it. It would be less dignified to pretend that he's not right.
Yeah,
so
true.
he just kind of takes the abuse.
Yeah, because he is totally right.
Yeah.
All right, so we flash back to Roland's past once again for the last time. In this novel, at least. He's 14. It's been 3 years since he witnessed the hanging of Hax. So if we're keeping score at home, it's only 2 years removed from the death of Roland's mother, father, and the fall of all of Gilead. Because remember, he said it was 5 years from the moment of the hanging. So we're 2 years. The world has already begun to move on. We don't see any direct cause for that. Like, it's not like we see the event that causes the world to move on. King just kind of describes it as a fraying. He says, like a rag rug that had been washed and walked on and shaken and hung and dried. The thread that held the last jewel at the breast of the world was unraveling. Things were not holding together.
Yeah. I mean, it does seem like this unraveling is sort of progressed from the outskirts inward, arriving at Gilead last. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. So it doesn't seem like it's going to be like a nuke goes off or something, like some one moment, some one event that causes the world to invariably change. It seems like it's going to be like a slow just dissolution of the thing that holds society together. Something
that took a few years, but not decades, and also not seconds. Yeah. I think we actually finally get some kind of answer as to how old Roland is, because he says he kind of gives us an age here, like he's 14 here, and then he says that his mother and father die 2 years from now, and then he goes chasing the Man in Black for like, what was it, 12 years or 15 years
Like
or something?
12 years, yeah.
So that's 12 plus 16. So he's not that old actually, unless I've made some mistake in my logic here.
Yeah, I mean, we don't. I think that checks with my math.
Yeah,
but yeah, like we said, soft time. We don't know.
soft time, but then later we find out his hair was like jet black, and then it's starting to go gray. So that kind of to me is like, okay, you get 10 years older, you go from 30 to 40. Say he's about 30 now, and then he's gonna be 40-ish looking later. Then it would make sense that he's about 30. It's not a big deal. It's just, I mean, we noticed at the beginning, like, hey, I have no idea how old this guy is.
Yeah.
So we're finally getting a bit of grounding on that. So,
yeah, totally. All right. So in this flashback, Roland is heading up to the roof to jerk off, as you do. When he's called into his parents' quarters by Martin. He's there alone with Roland's mother, and they kind of make awkward small talk about his studies are going badly. Roland is dumb, and how his hawk is doing past his prime. All while Martin stands over his mother's shoulder. His hands are on her neck, and this is clearly to Roland that it's all just a show, like a game of power. And Roland responds to this game by like stepping forward and challenging Martin, like reaffirming his class status over him. It's like Martin, he calls him bondsman, to reaffirm that like, I am superior to you, I own you, you belong to me. And Martin kind of completely rebuffs him, like he doesn't respond to that. He I think he just like dismisses it out of hand, and Roland storms off. And this is my favorite part of this. As he storms off, he's smiling rather horribly, the text describes. And he holds that smile basically like all the way through his entire encounter with Cort. He just keeps this horrible smile on his face, and he hears Martin strike his mother as he walks out the door.
Right. So this is one of those things that fed into my sense that this is an honor culture thing, because Child Roland here is like deranged with rage over this. And unless Martin is a total fool, he intended this reaction. You don't treat someone like that and not expect them to go ballistic on you, especially in an ancient culture like this. And so like, another thing is like in a lot of these honor cultures that have existed in the world, the unfaithful wife or mother must be killed to rectify the stain of dishonor.
Yeah.
And even short of that, just striking Roland's mother is probably a killing offense in itself. So
sure,
Martin's just like flaunting what he's done here to push Roland over the edge. So I kind of read this as all being part of this like break Roland mission that the Man in Black appears to have been on for 15 years.
Well, sure. And I mean, if we read that, like, if we read this as intentional, then is his decision to challenge Cort 2 years earlier than anyone has ever done it before a part of that intentional ploy?
So like one way to read that is that he's trying to push him into making a foolhardy choice by challenging Cort, and then he gets banished because he fails, and then the Man in Black gets to, take over the country or whatever. But of course, Roland doesn't fail, which is very surprising. So it's possible that the Man in Black just miscalculated. That's certainly possible.
Yeah.
Either way, though, it pushes Roland into doing very terrible and regrettable things that damage him for the rest of his life.
I mean, the other read is that he expected him to succeed, and everything that's led up to the moment that we're about to have in chapter 5 started with him pushing him to do that. And the consequences of that action. Yeah.
I assumed that he did expect him to succeed. But either way, though, it's a way of pushing Roland into terrible situations. So I think it's all part of the same like plan or whatever. Yeah.
Cool. Well, a note before we move on from this, we get to see in this moment that Roland is once again seeing his mother and thinking about her nursery rhymes. Once again, we see this one rhyme, like here we said, he saw her seldom now, and the phantom of cradle songs. And then we see chusset, chisset, chasset, which is part of that rhyme we heard earlier, bring enough to fill your basket. That's one that was dancing through Roland's head earlier in the story. And so King has kind of like firmly established that his link to his mother is through these nursery rhymes. And this is a mother we know he will kill later on. So I just think it's really interesting that like he's attached this idea of nursery rhymes, which are inherently like a childhood thing. Like even at 14, it says here that like that's not something that happens anymore. Like I've already grown past that. Perhaps even at 11, he had already grown past that. But the link he has to his mother, the thing that he most thinks about when he regards her, are these rhymes.
Yeah, I think that like a mother singing a nursery rhyme to a small child is maybe like the purest form of memory of love that a child will have. It's just like warmth and comfort and pure kind of unadulterated coziness and care.
Yeah.
And so this is what he remembers when he's at his most feeling sorry for himself, maybe.
Yeah.
So yeah, we learn that he is in some sense a matricide, and you automatically suspect that the nursery rhymes aren't exactly like a calming thing for him.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's more like he's being haunted by his mother. He's being haunted by her memory. And the fact, I also think it's interesting, the fact that his mom is like in his mind shamefully dishonoring his family, has some interesting implications to like how all the magic that we've seen in this world is kind of knotted up with sexuality and lust.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like he has these horrible associations with sexuality and lust, and it's like the world itself is twisted up in that way. It's really an interesting way of having the character and the setting kind of bounce off each other.
Yeah, we've had some of the comments to these episodes, mention Roland's specific misogyny that he sometimes feels. And I think part of this comes from the honor culture that he exists in. But I agree. I think part of it comes from, like, we know specifically that this Roland, this 14-year-old Roland, has not had sex yet. The book is specific in that he does so after he successfully beats Cort. That's one of the first things he does. But it does kind of make sense how his view on sexuality and his view on women maybe is tied up in this idea of his mother and Martin like committing this act that he's totally aware of, and how that damages and distorts his idea of these concepts. I don't want to put too much like 21st century like understanding on a book that's from the 20th century and also theoretically is taking place in like a past time with a different cultural system, but it seems like that could very possibly be part of his feelings towards women and his feelings towards sex.
I think he's definitely like deeply screwed up about what happened with his mom.
Yeah.
We still don't know what exactly him killing his mom looks like. Like, is it out of rage? Is it out of misunderstanding or confusion, or is that even a right way of saying it? Did he really kill her or something, or did he allow her to be killed or whatever? We'll find out eventually. The point is he's deeply messed up about it, and also probably blames her for things that aren't her fault.
Yeah,
that's a guess, I guess, but it's. I do see aspects of his misogyny at least being tied up in this thing. Yeah.
All right, so Roland busts into Cort's room, kicks a table across the room, and challenges him. The rite of passage in the way of the gun is to challenge your teacher to physical combat. Win, and you receive your guns and are officially a gunslinger. Lose, and you are exiled forever. Cort says that at 14, Roland is way too young, by 2 years at least. We learned that Roland's father was the youngest ever to successfully try the line, and he did it at 16. So Roland is clearly a fool here, but Cort is kind of honor-bound to accept the challenge.
Yeah, I had a pretty low opinion of Cort from the last chapter, because he's just such an asshole. But that completely turns around here, because Cort just obviously loves Roland.
Yeah.
And it becomes clear that he was treating him harshly, because like that's just how this world is actually. But here it's actually rather charming.
Yeah. So, because throughout this whole story, we see Roland has this horrible smile plastered on his face, and Cort is like begging him to cry off, as he says, "Wait until later." He even says like, "This is the last time I'm going to ask you." And he says, "No, I'm not." And then Cort said, "I lied. I'm not. I'm going to ask you one more time. Please don't go through with this. Please don't go through with this." And I love this because like you're right that there's this kind of change here, right? There's this shift. Cort goes in this one moment from being the master to respecting Roland's like class, like because he is subservient to him almost like. And it's this really interesting switch that happens. Like the second Roland barges into this house that King makes sure to show us that is the place that they were like never allowed to go. So even like trespassing on this spot is demonstrating that our role as master and apprentice is not the way things are anymore.
Yeah, like exactly. One way or another, this is over.
Yeah.
And like rudely kicking the table and everything. It's such a demonstration of the state of rage that he's in right now.
Yep.
Which obviously Cort can tell that he's enraged, and it's funny because Cort doesn't ask like what happened, right? Or maybe he does ask, but he's just like, okay, obviously something prompted this. And now it's a problem.
He doesn't ask, but he knows exactly what's going on here. It seems like this whole Martin and I forgot Roland's mom's name. I feel bad about that, but it seems like their whole thing is like the worst kept secret in town. It seems like everyone knows that something weird's going on with that.
Yeah, he's like, oh shit, not this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, you feel like Cort is such a hard ass that like it's a huge deal for him to offer Roland the way out, and then especially a huge deal when he kind of doubles down on telling him like please don't do this. And again, it's a real indication of his love for Roland.
Yeah, despite Roland's slowness in the mind, Cort says he's like one of the best students he's had in a long time, and this would be throwing his future away, basically.
Yeah.
But Roland refuses to back down, and then he marches off to get his weapon. His weapon is David, the hawk. David is old, and David will be a sacrifice, the book says. Now, maybe we understand why Roland was a little hesitant to tell the story to Jake.
Yeah. I mean, it also, like, I know we just talked about the idea that Jake asked for it because he wanted to find out what it meant to become an adult, but it's almost like suspicious that it has this detail in it, and it's like, how did you know to ask for that, Jake?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have this part that I just wanted to point out to you in case you missed it. Like right before the match starts, Roland and Cort meet on the field, and Roland's friends are watching off from the sideline, and then we go through this tradition. It seems like this kind of customary conversation here, where it says, "So then you have at me, boy? I do. In whose name? In the name of my father. Say his name. Stephen Deshane of the line of Eld." And I just wanted to remind you that Arthur Eld was what Roland called King Arthur back last week. So the implication here is that in this world or whatever, Roland appears to be a descendant of King Arthur himself.
Yeah. Although I think Stephen isn't literally a king because maybe that would be too on the nose. I somehow kind of figured that this was the case even before we found out. Like it just made sense to me that this was basically Arthurian.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, that's interesting, right? It's because the legend of King Arthur is just a legend, right?
Yeah.
Like, do we even think there was a king named Arthur? Maybe there was. I don't know. I feel like that's one of those things where this isn't even historical. This is legendary. This isn't the past. This is legend. I
feel like every year I read a different historian take on it. Like, you remember when that King Arthur movie came out with Keira Knightley in it, and the whole big selling point of that was like historians have surfaced new documents that prove that Arthur was a real person, and I was like, yeah, are you sure? So yeah, I mean, I think it goes back and forth. I certainly the King Arthur that we read about in all of these stories, if there was a person even close to that name, none of it comes from it at all. None of it. Yeah,
right. It's it was not King Arthur did not have handguns. Also,
that's very true.
Yeah,
that we know of. One thing this reminds me though. One thing I forgot to mention last week, and we kind of got some more of it this week. Like they are in kind of ancient, quote unquote, biblical Arthurian times or whatever in these flashbacks. But we do still see like little bits of technology because the lights in the ballroom during the cotillion were electric lights. It mentioned that Hax had like one of the 6 remaining electric stoves that still existed in the, I think the city or the world, maybe. I don't know. Like, so there is still like this old ancient technology. So we have like past Gilead, but then we have like before technology before that's still around. So
it did. This is one of the things that made me think that this is just the future. Like Gilead is just the future. and then things get confusing because time becomes soft, and now the past starts leaking into the future, and so you find an Amoco pump and you find nuclear power or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is one of those things where I kind of want to know, but also I don't think I would mind if we just never really find out what exactly the deal is.
Fair. All right, so the battle begins and Roland reveals that his weapon of choice is David, and Cort, too late, realizes what that means. Roland has kind of thrown the dice here. He's bet on his friendship with David, bet that the Old Hawk would listen to his command and to his friend and allow himself to be sacrificed rather than just like fly away or just sit there on his arm and not do anything. And Roland happens to be right. He befriends David and then he throws his friend at Cort, and to his death, David rips Cort's face to shreds, and the Hawk is like horribly killed in the process. Like both of his wings are broken and Cort breaks his back, and it's awful. And Roland uses this advantage to overpower Cort and win.
Yeah, Roland does not hold back here. Like if you're going to have to fight your mentor as part of your rite of passage, I feel like most people in this culture probably aren't going to go straight for disfigurement and probable death.
Yeah.
But Roland is just like completely brutal. And even now, we've heard nothing about the tower from young Roland, but his quest here is to become a gunslinger so he can get his satisfaction. And his quest here is more important than anything else. He's willing to sacrifice David. He's basically willing to sacrifice Cort, too.
Yeah, because we'll learn later that Cort is like comatose for weeks after this. Like he's hurt bad.
I assumed that he died after that. Is that wrong?
I don't think they said that.
Okay.
But
yeah, I thought it was he was in a coma and then he died, but I may have misunderstood it or just kind of assumed.
Yeah, and besides the obvious connection King is making here between David and Jake, I think you're absolutely right about Cort being a sacrifice as well. And I think I want to draw attention to this connection that King makes between Cort and Martin. Because over the course of the story Roland is telling, he calls both Martin and Cort bondsmen. He calls Martin bondsman when he dares to challenge him. And then when he's calling Cort out to test the line, he calls him bondsman as well. And Martin's reaction to that, like basically that explicit stating of place, of class, of caste, is to disrespect him, to ignore him, to blow him off. Cort's response to that command is appropriate. He kneels before his lord, or whatever you want to call it. And yet Martin is not the one that ends this day bleeding and broken and comatose. It is Cort, the one that showed the proper respect, the one that kneeled before the person in the caste higher than him, is the one that's bloodied and bruised and beaten and comatose. And I just think that's really interesting. Yeah,
that is interesting. Like present day Roland doesn't like behave like a prince, but it is really interesting to see him kind of throwing his weight around. But yeah, like it doesn't seem like people in this story, like it doesn't seem like you end up paying the price for doing the crime. It's the ones who are the innocent bystanders who end up paying the price.
Yeah, totally.
I like that. Yeah. I mean, it's horrible, but I like it.
It's awful. Yeah. Roland gets keys from Cort. Turns out Cort keeps the keys to the guns that you earn once you appropriately test the line. And his plan here is to get the keys, get the guns, and then presumably, I don't know if he's just going to like walk up and shoot Martin. We're not quite understanding of like what gunslingers are in the society besides what we think is like this kind of knight. So we don't know if like being a gunslinger gives him the authority he needs to just walk up and shoot the guy in the face. But he's going to do something to that effect, and Cort stops him. He begs him to wait. He begs him to wait before striking out at the magician. He says something to the effect of like, let the legend of this moment build and maybe draw support to you before you take this guy out. And for the last time, Roland listens. Yeah, it implies a lot, right? It implies that there's this whole political situation behind the scenes where, because I feel like, my feeling is that Roland could probably just walk up to him and shoot him, and he wouldn't be a criminal for doing that. Yeah, but he would lose a lot of support for doing that. He would be considered a fool, and maybe Martin has a lot of political support. Like there is this whole rebellion thing happening. Yeah, so like maybe it would just be a really awful thing, like a really awful political move, even if he could technically get away with it. And that's why. And Cort is
is aware of all of this, and so that's where the advice comes from.
Sure.
This is my assumption.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So before we leave this part, there's this one, the conclusion of the story I think is great, because there's this moment where Roland looks at Cuthbert, his best friend, and this scene plays out, and I really love it. The gunslinger and Cuthbert looked at each other. They had always been the closest, or as close as they could be under the particular shades of their characters. There was a speculative open light in Bert's eyes, and the gunslinger controlled only with great difficulty the need to tell him not to call for the test for a year, or even 18 months, lest he go west. But they had been through a great ordeal together, and the gunslinger did not feel like he could risk saying such a thing without a look on his face that might be taken for arrogance. I've begun to scheme, he thought, and was a little dismayed. Then he thought of Martin, of his mother, and he smiled a deceiver's smile at his friend. I am to be the first, he thought, knowing it for the first time, and although he had thought of it idly many times before, I am the first. Let's go, he said. With pleasure, gunslinger. And I just love this moment because like Cort is, or Cuthbert is like his best friend, and we know Cuthbert dies, like we know he's dead, and we've heard like the Battle of Jericho Hill. That's something he said before in the past. That sounds familiar to you, right? I didn't just ruin something. Okay, good.
No, I've heard of this phrase. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we know that's where Cuthbert died. And there's this moment here where like he's already feeling superior to the person, and like this kind of friendship is fractured in a way. It changed because Roland's a gunslinger now. And I love the text emphasizes that by this moment where Cuthbert says, with pleasure, gunslinger. Like it just, their relationship has changed.
Yeah, there's this separation for him. I think this is interestingly part of the coming of age is like when you come of age, maybe one of the things you didn't expect is that now effectively all of your relationships change, like all of your friendships with the other kids are now broken, and you have to kind of start over. Well, because I mean there's this moment I think in Cuthbert that he sees in his eyes that like, well, Roland did it, maybe I can do it, and he wants to tell him, whatever you do, don't do that, you will definitely lose. And then he's like, oh, that sounds arrogant and terrible. So he barely holds on to holding that back. And yeah, it's like this, I am the first, I am to be the first, it is me. And then he eventually says, I also will be the last, which is how the story ends, which is just wonderful. But yeah, I mean, it's this complicated nature. I look forward to exploring the friendship between the gunslinger and Cuthbert more as we go along, because spoilers, we're going to see a little bit more of him. Right. Just as an aside, I remember my prediction from a while back was like, I think I said most of the story is going to be flashbacks. Yeah. And if I did say most, I'm probably wrong because I no longer think most of the story is going to be flashbacks. But
I believe you said that like the confrontation with the Man in Black is going to be the end of the series, not just this book.
Yeah, I don't remember my exact wording,
but
I'm pretty sure that my wording is technically wrong, but I'm also still pretty confident that a lot of the book is going to be flashbacks of Roland's past, even though I think we are going to be moving, forward into the future, whatever the hell time is in this world.
Yeah. So Roland completes his story and he asks if Jake understood it. And Jake is like so fucking indignant about this because he's like, yeah, no, I got it, Roland. Like I got your metaphor. It was not very subtle. And he says to him, I know what I am to you. And what is that? The gunslinger asked tightly. A poker chip. The gunslinger felt an urge to find a rock and brain the boy. I think that's such a powerful moment because once again, we established that Jake not only got the metaphor of the story, he knows at this point exactly what he is to Roland. He knows that this uncoupling has taken place and he has no delusions about that. And then Roland's violent reaction to the truth is really fascinating.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think part of Roland's anger here is at least in part because the phrasing makes Roland seem so like undignified. Like a poker chip implies that you're just a poker player. Like calling Jake the sacrifice. It's such a like self-important way for him to phrase what he's about to do.
Yeah, yeah.
And Jake being like, I'm just a poker chip, you're just a tawdry gambler, is such a it obviously hurts Roland.
Yeah.
It doesn't allow him to think of himself in these highfalutin terms.
I like that a lot because one of the things that Jake is saying over and over again is like these are these games that adults play, and he sees this as just part of that game. And Roland does not see it as a game at all. To him, this is the most important thing in the world. This is Ka. This is his destiny. And so to reduce this to just another move in a game that he's playing. Yeah, I love that. I hadn't thought of that before, but you're absolutely right.
And I think that Jake's basically right. Like he sees through Roland in a way where Roland, like he's the protagonist, he's the point of view, and so we kind of get swept up in his like inward monologuing, where he's like, it was all for the bloody good, for the tower, for the grail, and you're like, yeah, it's important, and here's Jake like, no, it's you're this is a story you're telling yourself. This is all in your head.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I love it.
It's great. So the next day, Roland and Jake bump into some slow mutants. These things are described as tentacled, insect-eyed humanoid figures that glow an eerie radiation green. And while they are slow mutants, there are a lot of them.
Yeah. Always gotta love King describing creepy monsters. Like that's one thing I want to talk. I hope we get more opportunity to talk about in this book, is like the words he chooses for the descriptions just make everything so gross and vivid. Like you feel like even a painting of this image wouldn't really capture the connotations that these words actually convey.
Yeah. And that's actually like, I am not like a very visual reader. There's a term for this and I don't remember what it is, but like, I don't like see the scene normally when I read for the most. Like if you told me to draw these things right now, I probably would do a shitty job of it. But one of the reasons why I think King is one of my favorite writers and why I like him so much is because the adjectives that he used for these establish a feeling. I can't draw what a slow mutant is, but I can describe how they make me feel. And I think that's what he really excels at. And I really, really love it. Like they're so weird and gross.
Yeah, it makes me wonder just idly like how visual King is himself.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because I know some writers don't actually visualize things very much.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
It's gross. I love it.
So during the fight, there's this moment where one of the slow mutants grabs Jake and just starts to attempt to pull him off the cart. Roland holds strong, but he's not pumping the handcart because he's holding on to Jake. And it starts to slow down, which means more of the mutants are going to catch up. And King is totally playing with us here. We've established so much that Roland would need to sacrifice Jake to advance on this journey. And this is it, right? This is the moment it seems like it's going to happen. The text says, "It is the end for the boy," the gunslinger thought with perfect coldness. "This is the end he meant. Let go and pump, or hold on and be buried. The end for the boy." But then he doesn't. He gives one last heave and pulls Jake up, and they get the cart moving again. He saves Jake here, and there's this moment of exhale that Stephen King intentionally creates for it. Like, we passed it. Like, was that it? Did we just do it? And then he plays with you more, because then there's rocks in front of the cart, and then he's like, "Jake, Go move those. You get off the cart and go deal with this." And once again, like there's another moment of like, okay, this is it. Here we go. Once again. But then no, everything works out. The rocks are moved. They both get on and they ride away from the slow mutants and to safety. And it's such a manipulation on King's part.
Yeah, it's an ingenious thing to do, and it's executed so well too. Because like Roland actually wants this to be the moment so that it will be over with.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really feel like it's the moment, and it's not the moment.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, right? Because like he feels like this is the moment, and he knows he was going to make this choice, and yet he doesn't. Like he holds on to him. He gives it one last pull. He makes the choice to save him, a choice he will not make later. And I think it's because the moment that Roland does make the choice is so deviously designed by the Man in Black. Whereas here, it's just like holding on to the boy is different from you have two people yelling at you and one's like, "Oh, I'm going to go. Okay, fine. I'm going to go." And then you're forced into that.
It's true. Yeah.
So they eventually see light at the end of the tunnel, but it's not the outside, not yet. It's more like an ancient subway stop, complete with booths and shops, weapon shops, clothing shops. Roland snags an ancient bow and arrow And then they find some mummies, ancient corpses of people almost perfectly preserved mid-action. The one they see is wearing, or is just reading a newspaper. Roland surmises that they were killed by gas that the quote-unquote old people used. Each person in the station is wearing a uniform, making us believe this was some sort of military installation that was gassed to death.
Yeah, it's interesting how this seems to be like a commercial place, but the only people here are military. Is that right?
Yeah. It doesn't say it directly, but they're all wearing the same clothes. So
yeah. Interesting. I guess maybe they're not military. Maybe it's just some other kind of uniform. But yeah, I don't really know what to make of it. Actually, like it hints that some kind of apocalyptic total war happened in the past, and people were using gas, and usually gas means the gloves are off militarily. Yeah. Something bad happened in the past.
My assumption was that like this was a commercial space, and then things have degraded enough that like it is being occupied as a military installation, and that is why it is gassed to death. So
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's really like off-putting and weird because like once again we are literally like going through a tunnel into another type of story. I mean, like seeing ancient corpses of gassed people it's not a Western.
Yeah, right. I mean, I got so thrown off for a second that as I was thinking it through, I was like, is this NORAD? Like they're under a mountain. Is this actually NORAD? Are they in Colorado Springs? And then I was like, no, it's a commercial subway stop that has military people. So that's not right. But yeah, it's really strange.
Yeah, it really is. As Roland heads back to track 10 and the path to the surface, Jake finally stands his ground. He's not moving anymore. He's staying. And for a brief moment that Roland describes as almost a vision, he considers turning back and taking the boy back and like going home and then maybe waiting till Jake was a little bit older and then trying for the tower again together. But then Roland reminds himself that the other way is certain death, either by the slow mutants that are surely blocking their path or by just the regular decay of time. So Roland just decides he's going to go on and leave the boy behind. But this is all a calculation, right? He knows that Jake will chase after him, which he does. And we see in these moments how much Roland is kind of like talking to himself. He doubts his actions constantly, but he is reassuring himself. Like he says, how easily you bluff this young boy gunslinger, or young boy the gunslinger told himself again. Again and again, his wonderful intuition, his touch has led him to this point. And again, you have led him on past it. And how difficult could it be? After all, he has no friends but you. Like, he's disparaging of himself, but then also trying to psych himself up again.
Yeah, like almost the only redeeming quality of Roland at this point in the story is that he has the grace to feel bad about what he's doing. Like, he's flagellating himself over it, but he doesn't feel bad enough to stop it.
Yeah. And I also just want to point out that, like, the book is kind of hitting this drum that, like, Jake has almost an extra sensory intuition. That he describes as his touch here. I don't want to go too far into that, but it's like in this world of magical powers, Jake seems to intuit beyond the normal measure of man.
Yeah, that's true. And in retrospect, some of the like sharpness and acuity in questioning that he had earlier could be chalked up to like, just a little bit of an insight. I mean, stuff like Roland having like an imagination that is almost a vision. That's the kind of thing where like this is par for the course for Roland.
Yeah.
Like he gets visions and stuff. Like he obviously has some kind of psychic something, and I think the boy has the same thing.
I mean,
perhaps some kind of shining, if you will.
I wasn't gonna say the word. I mean, I think this makes a lot of Jake's actions make more sense when you put it in this context, though, because like. We're in Roland's head, so when Jake says things like "You're gonna kill me, aren't you?" we're like, "Wow!" Like he's really like we kind of forget to be surprised by that because like in our heads we're like, "Yep, totally." But yeah, I mean, how he makes that logical leap is seemingly pretty
supernatural.
Yeah.
That's a good point, and I think I didn't catch that at the time, but yeah, in retrospect, that should have rung an alarm bell of some kind.
So Roland and Jake continue on their path, and they go through like a neon tunnel of fossils, which Roland says as fossils. I don't have anything smart to say there. I just thought it was funny. And then they find that the train track like the floor drops off and the track continues over a giant chasm connecting to the outside, and they see like a pinprick of daylight just beyond it. The trestle is old aeons old, and Roland and Jake proceed to climb onto it on foot.
Yeah, here's our bridge of Khazad-dûm.
I can't believe I never saw that before. I'm so mad at myself.
It makes me feel like as this journey has progressed, everything has become narrower. Like options have been stripped away.
Yeah.
Until now, literally, there's only one option to move forward, with Roland literally pushing Jake ahead of him.
Yeah, and the way is like totally precarious. Like as they get closer and closer to the light at the end of the tunnel, everything gets older and less sure-footed, and Jake is getting more and more afraid. It's like he knows it's coming. He's like ahead of Roland because he's lighter, so he can kind of test things out. And the entire time he's like telling Roland, like, no, you can't, like, this is not going to support you. Go back. And then we see this moment. The boy shuddered helplessly. Go back. I don't want you to kill me. It's a really, really emotional moment.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's painful. It's mean.
Yeah.
I this is what, like, honestly, I mean, I'm excited to read these books, but it's one of these moments where I'm like, King, you better earn what you just did to me emotionally here. This is such a low blow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like storytelling wise, like if you're going to do this to me here, you're going to have to really kind of do something interesting with this character too. Because the question was, do we like Roland? Right now, I don't like Roland a whole lot. I don't think I'm supposed to like Roland a whole lot right now. I think I would be surprised if King finished this book and was like, I did a great job making Roland a really likable protagonist. So yeah, this is rough to get through, actually.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to your Lord of the Rings metaphor, it would be like if Frodo and Sam like ran out and like stamped on Gandalf's fingers.
Yeah. Yes,
we probably wouldn't feel too great about him.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah. So just as they are finally about to escape, the light at the end of the tunnel is suddenly blocked, which is a really great moment, right? Like they're slowly working towards this light. It's getting bigger and bigger, and they're like carefully, like you can imagine Roland like carefully watching where his feet step, and then suddenly the light dims, and then we realize the reason the light dimmed is because standing in the mouth of the tunnel is the man in black. And as soon as Walter appears, the trestle finally breaks and starts to collapse, and Jake plunges. He's hanging on by a couple hands. And here we go. We have this moment. Help me, Jake says, booming, racketing. No more games. Come now, gunslinger, or catch me never. All the chips on the table, every card up but one. The boy dangled, a living tarot card. The hanged man, the Phoenician sailor, innocent, lost, and barely above the wave of a Stygian sea. Roland must choose. And he does, Matt, he does, leaping over the gap, over the dangling Jake and towards safety. As the trestle collapses, we don't hear a cry or a scream or panic or fear from Jake, just one simple phrase. Go then. There are other worlds than these.
Oh, man. Fly, you fools. But actually, I have to admit, I don't really know what this means. Like, other than being wonderfully chilling that he just says this and then falls silently, like, does Jake expect to go to one of these worlds, or is he expecting that Roland will find himself in a worse world, a hell, for having made this choice? Like, is this his way of saying, like, fine, go to hell? I mean, it's a great line, but it also doesn't like sound like something that Jake would say.
Yeah,
So it's just a weird. It's interesting.
I think you're right on track. I think you're supposed to feel that way, and I think the fact that it does not sound very Jake. Like, where is this coming from? Right? Like, whatever. I don't want to call it shining, but whatever intuition he has, Jake in this moment is tapping into something, and we're not sure what it is.
That was my feeling, like something was speaking through him here, because either Jake is not really who we think he is, or there's something else going on in this moment. I
mean, this is the most powerful part in the book. I think go then, there are other worlds than these is one of the most powerful lines in the story. And Stephen King uses this line multiple times in other books, by the way. I just read Dr. Sleep for the first time. It was a book I had never read, and he has one of his characters in Dr. Sleep use this phrase, and it's like it has so much weight to it. When you read that in other King books, you're like, oh fuck. But I think I love your Lord of the Rings like comparison here, because if we look at these two moments in Lord of the Rings, this is the moment where the wizard Gandalf sacrifices himself to ensure the success of the quest. He saves the fellowship by sacrificing himself.
Yeah.
And fly, you fools. The final line he says is, leave me, leave me. Like, don't worry about me. Leave me. Go forward. This is instead of Jake choosing to sacrifice himself for the quest. This is Jake being chosen to sacrifice for the quest. And his thing is not leave me, you idiot. It's like, fine, go. I don't even care. I mean, that's like, I agree with you that in this moment, we're supposed to really understand. But to me, like, the tone of go then, there are other worlds than these is like, fine, fuck you. I don't even care. Like, fuck off.
Yeah, I agree. I feel the same about the tone. Yes. And I feel like it's one of those things where as you're reading through it, you're just like, okay, maybe I'll understand better what this means later. But as it is sort of an emotion. It hits you on an emotional level more than an understanding level.
Yeah,
which is fine.
Yeah. And I think the understanding level comes later with more understanding.
Yes, that makes sense.
So Roland walks out of the mountain and he's totally reeling from the choice he just made, which he should be, because if he was not feeling terrible about this, he would be a literal monster. But he says here, like, he knows that this is going to haunt him for the rest of his life. He said he would flee the boy's face and try to bury it in cunts and killing, only to enter one final room and find it looking at him over a candle flame. He had become the boy. The boy had become him. He was becoming a werewolf of his own making. I love the werewolf imagery there. Like, that's so powerful. I've never seen like werewolf used to describe that. Like this transformation of him. Of his.
That's really interesting. There are a lot of lines in these chapters, too many for me to pick out really, where you're just like, wait, what? Like, literally? like you mean the story is going to end with him running into Jake over a candle flame, or is that like a metaphor? Oh, we're just moving on. Oh, okay. So it all kind of adds up. Like, I think to leave you with more of a feeling than an expectation. Like, I don't know if I literally expect that he's going to run into Jake over a candle flame, but you have a feeling like, well, this is going to dog him through the rest of the story in a way where that might as well be the case.
Yeah. I think so. I think like even if we say that like the end of his quest is the tower, right? Like, he gets to the tower. This is almost as if to say, even at the top of that tower, I will still see him.
Yeah. I like that. I like that framing of it. Yeah.
So I love this so much, though. Like, I love, like, this entire chapter has this amazing sense of inevitability, and yet still knowing all the while that Jake would never walk out of that mountain.
Yeah.
Like, part of Roland is still destroyed by it, but he's still destroyed by the choice that he made. And I just think that's really powerful. Like, I totally agree with you that I don't like Roland right now. I don't like him. I don't like the choice. It's incredibly ridiculous to make your protagonist murder a child, or rather through inaction allow the death of a child. It's like the worst thing you could, like, the only thing worse than this if like Jake was holding a puppy while he fell. Like, that's the only way you make this worse. But at least King grants us, the people reading the story, a vision of Roland's guilt, so we can at least be like, okay, well, at least he feels bad about it. At least we have that little thing to grab onto.
Yeah, it's like we were with him and he was with us in like hoping that this wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
And then when it does happen, we're like equally disappointed in him.
Yeah.
And we knew he'd be destroyed by it. And I guess, did he know he'd be destroyed by it? I mean, I think he did, but he has this interesting way of discounting his own humanity.
Yeah.
Like the time when Brown asks him, like, aren't you, like he says, like, yeah, like too bad you had to do that. You must be upset, or whatever he says. And Roland's like, why would I be? Yeah. And it's like, are you serious? Like, are you this disconnected from humanity? And the answer that we have learned over the course of this book is yes. He is still a human. He's so screwed up that he has trouble knowing how things are going to affect him. And he's stupid.
Yeah. All right, but here stands the man in black, and it's time to palaver. This is it. So we move on to chapter 5, the final chapter of the Gunslinger, titled "The Gunslinger and the Man in Black." This chapter is a really interesting one, Matt, and I'm really curious before we really get into it, what you expected the confrontation between Roland and Walter O'Dim to look like, and if it came anywhere close to what it actually is in the story.
I mean, if you'd asked me at the start, I would not have expected that their confrontation would look like a conversation where the man in black pontificates about his philosophy and gives Roland a vision. No. In fact, I wouldn't have expected him to catch the man in black in this book at all.
Fair.
I expected the chase to last throughout the series. Of course, now we know that he really just wants the tower. The man in black was just like a means to an end. Mm-hmm. I mean, I probably, like, if they were going to have a confrontation, I probably expected something involving magic and shooting, which I guess sort of happens, and that he shoots at him completely ineffectually.
Yep, it just does nothing. Yep.
Yeah.
And this is going to be kind of a hard chapter for us to discuss, or at least for me to discuss, because, like, I think it's just going to be me, like, nodding and saying, because a lot of this is just a lot of exposition and setup for the future of the series. This is kind of, as it's described in this chapter itself, this is the end of the beginning. Like, this is the end of the first book that is really just setting everything in motion for what the quest is going to be at the beginning of the book. We learn here that this was not the end of the quest. This was just the really getting, like, he's going to the quest giver. The man in black is the NPC that's going to give him the quest, get to the tower.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard. It's going to be kind of hard for me to, like, really engage on some of the stuff where I'm just going to be like, yeah, trust me, this is going to matter later. It will.
I think that, I mean, I feel like it's inevitable. This is going to be less of a discussion because it's just like a conversation and you're just like, okay, interesting information.
Right.
Yeah.
But anyway, Walter leads Roland into a Golgotha. This is a biblical term for those that know. It's the place where Romans would crucify folks. The most famous of which, of course, is Jesus Christ himself. It's also another word for, I think the Roman word for this is Calvary. So already this location seems to have some pretty significance in biblical references.
Yeah, the biblical Golgotha was obviously a place of not just death, but of sacrifice.
Yeah.
So there's this implicit parallel to Jake's immediately prior death being aligned with Jesus' sacrifice.
Yeah, but we're not done with those biblical references yet, Matt, because the next line here is the gunslinger says, "I'll kill you. No, you won't. You can't. But you can gather wood to remember your Isaac." The gunslinger had no understanding of the reference. So this is really interesting to me, Matt, because Walter calls Jake Roland's Isaac, referencing the Binding of Isaac story in the Bible, right? Except Abraham did not actually go through with the sacrifice. It's an important distinction there, Roland. The most interesting part of this to me is not that the man in black would make that reference. He has constantly made references over and over again to both stuff in our world, but also just like random just references to Bible stuff constantly. But rather that Roland seems to have no idea what it means. Because so far in the story, the references to the Bible, both Old Testament and some New, have basically been understood by every character in this world. But this one, arguably one of the more important Old Testament stories, is Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, he's never heard of. And it's really, really interesting, right?
Yeah. So they know a lot about the Old Testament, but they don't know this one story where God demands a sacrifice, but then crucially says, never mind, you've shown your devotion, you don't need to go through with it. Which obviously has relevance to this current moment. And they also know about the man Jesus, but you kind of get the sense that this man Jesus is not really exactly the same as the New Testament Jesus.
Sure.
Like, just the way they talk about it and everything, it just feels different. So I'm wondering, like, do they have a different Bible or like, do they not even have a Bible? And these are just like the stories of their culture.
Yeah.
It begs all kinds of questions. And this one specific one being missing from their canon is super interesting.
Yeah. And I want to go back. I have this pulled up. The most information we get about the Bible in this book is from Sylvia Pittston, right? And when she's describing all the moments from the book, and everything in there is accurate to our Bible. Like, I have walked arm in arm in the lion's den with Daniel. I stood with David when he was tempted by Bathsheba as she bathed in the pool. I have been in the fiery furnaces with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I slew 2,000 with Samson when he swung the jawbone. I was blinded with St. Paul on the road to Damascus. I wept with Mary at Golgotha. I mean, that's like... Yeah,
that's our Old and New Testament.
That's our Bible. That's all. Yeah, that is the earth Christian Bible right there.
The jawbone jumps out to me more now that we have like repeated references to Roland just grabbing jawbones.
Yeah,
right
I kind of want to go read the story of Samson with that jawbone again and see if we can find that. But yeah, I mean, so I think you're right. It is rather significant that this Bible, which seems to so closely match ours, either just does not have the Binding of Isaac story in it, or Roland just didn't ever bother to learn that one.
Yeah, possible. I mean, I want to read a lot into it.
Yeah, I mean,
I want to read way more into it than just he just isn't familiar with that.
Yeah.
So
the interesting thing here, though, is the Man in Black is like giddy during this whole time. He's so happy to be here. He's so happy for this moment. He's complimenting Roland with this air of mockery to him, and then we finally see his face, and it's just like it looks like a face, just a normal face. Everything about him seems kind of normal, actually. And as the sun sets for what Walter says will be the last time in a while, it's tarot time.
Yeah, the Man in Black is just so undignified. And we sort of met him before through Allie's point of view. Mm-hmm. And here he continues to just kind of be this weird guy.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't seem formidable at any point.
Yeah, right? Like there's nothing like scary about him. Like,
yeah. Stephen King can make some real creepy people. Mm-hmm. Like even people who aren't explicitly supernatural can be. He can convey the creepy, right? And this guy, I mean, there's a little bit of creepy around him, right? But he's not scary in that way that we know King can do.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
It is interesting. So Walter reads Roland's fortune using some tarot cards, and now you maybe understand what the image art for our entire show is, Matt. Maybe you get it now.
Yeah.
Which is just for me to say, like, if the show ever gets big, which fingers crossed, everyone share it with all your friends. We want to get really big. We are going to commission. I want to commission a full set of paintings of all 7 of these cards from Cyrix, who helped us with the card for the title, because I want to see every one of these cards matching that style, matching Cyrix's style, and with a little bit of flair on them. I think that'd be really cool.
Yes, I would also love that to happen.
So let's talk about these as much as we can, kind of. Roland is the Hanged Man. That's the card that Walter gives to Roland. And he says, yet here, in conjunction with nothing else, it signals strength, not death. You, Gunslinger, are the Hanged Man, plodding ever onward towards your goal over the pits of Na'ar. You've already dropped one co-traveler into that pit, have you not? So I think the Hanged Man forces us back to go to the one story that Roland told, with the hanging of hacks. And that seems rather significant that he is given that card to the Hanged Man. Yeah,
that's true. I don't know what to make of that, but for sure having a prominent hanging in his past kind of marks him.
Yeah, totally. And the other interesting thing about this is the first time I've caught this. I love close readings because you just catch things. It's really fun. Roland, when he describes Jake dangling over the pit, over the bridge of Khazad-dûm, he references tarot cards, right? He said, I read that a couple minutes ago. He references the Hanged Man, and he references the Phoenician sailor, who ends up being the card that Jake is. And I love how, like, what prompted that, right? Like it's just so weird and specific to, in this moment, be like, you know what this reminds me of? A couple tarot cards. And then immediately upon exiting the cave, the Man in Black is like, let's read your fortune with tarot cards. Like it's very significant, I think.
Right. And it's literally the same references. It's the same Phoenician sailor.
Yeah.
I don't think we get a reference to a Stygian sea here, but
no.
It's all clearly the thing that just happened. Like King is not asking us to like squint and try to figure it out, right? It's like, oh, yep, that's what just happened.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it supports the idea of the boy was he and he was the boy, when he describes the boy with 2 different cards, and the cards that end up being assigned to them are the one that's his and the one that's Jake's.
Yeah.
Because we see the second card here is Jake the sailor. Note the clear brow, the hairless cheeks, the wounded eyes. He drowns, Gunslinger, and no one throws out the line. The boy, Jake. It's like just kind of twisting the knife there.
Yeah, he is, because this isn't a fortune, right? This is just almost like getting his bona fides on the table.
Yeah.
Like, yes, my cards are magical. Mm-hmm. I I'm telling you what is going on, and now I'm going to tell you the future.
Yeah, yeah. The third card is the prisoner. A baboon stood grinningly astride a young man's shoulder. The young man's face was turned up, a grimace of stylized dread and horror on his features. Looking more closely, the gunslinger saw that the baboon had a whip.
Okay, well, the monkey on your back is a reference to drug addiction, and we know that Roland is prophesied to meet a young man who is being ridden by heroin, the demon of heroin.
Yes.
So I think this is probably a reference to that.
I can safely say yes, that is what that is referencing. And we'll see as we go here that this prophecy is mirroring the Oracle's prophecy in interesting ways. Because our fourth card is the Lady of Shadows. She is described as two-faced, sitting at a spinning wheel and laughing and crying at the same time. There's also this really interesting part where Walter says, she broke the blue plate. And then the gunslinger was like, what does that mean? And Walter's like, I don't know. Like, which I think is what we're seeing here. Like, the book has built up the Man in Black as this like impossible, unknowable, ununderstandable foe. And what this chapter is doing is kind of reducing him. In fact, like, pretty soon we're going to learn that he's just an emissary of the real bad guy. He's not the bad guy himself. He just works for him.
Yeah.
And so we're like reducing his importance in the story, which is very shocking.
Yeah. He's almost just like parroting lines that are being fed to him here, where he's reading the cards and he says the blue play. He's like, I don't know. It's just some words that I was supposed to say here.
Right.
I mean, so I wonder if we're kind of following the structure of the previous prophecy, if this is the woman who comes on wheels. And it's interesting, at least, that the like all of his prophecies so far have been the same as the zombie things prophecies, just with different words. As for the blue plate, I was like, okay, like a blue plate special, like at a diner. That's all I got for that.
Yeah. Okay. So the fifth card is Death, a grinning reaper holding a scythe. And then Walter says, but not for you, which I think, like, I agree with you. Like, I agree with you that both the previous ones do have enough connections back to the Oracle's prophecy that we can probably draw those lines immediately. But I think King designed this last one to make that clear, right?
Yeah.
Because Walter says the same thing that the Oracle said, which is death, but not for you.
Yeah, same language, yeah.
It's exactly the same. So I think it allows you to make that connection. And once you've made that connection, you look back at the others and see, oh yeah, sitting on a spinning wheel, maybe that goes with the wheels. Monkey on your back, that's hair. Yeah, I think that's King has designed it that way, and I think it's just very sharp writing where like you give hint and then make it clear, and that allows you to retroactively go back and understand.
Yeah, so that's all. I agree with you on that. I'm more interested in why. Like,
Sure.
why have multiple prophecies that line up to say the same thing? I mean, one sense is like, well, it's giving you more sense that these are true prophecies, sure, but also why? Like, why even have these prophecies be in the story? I'm not sure I understand that yet, and I think that it would be weird if I did, considering that it's only after we've actually seen the events that these are referring to that I will understand what the point was. But yeah, I'm definitely like, okay, I'm obviously going to be patient with it, but I'm not sure where we're going with this.
Sure. And I don't have a good answer for you, other than to say, isn't it interesting that maybe Roland didn't need this prophecy to go forward on his quest? Yeah,
that's one thing that stands out, is like what a useless conversation this is, basically. I mean, he gets the vision in a second, but this is such a pat repeat. Well, I mean, it's different words, but it's the same prophecy he already got, and the Man in Black is acting like he's doing this huge magical favor for him, and it's like, yeah, I already got this prophecy.
Yeah, it's right.
It's almost funny the degree to which it's like the same information again.
Right. Well, I think the question we need to ask ourselves, like, if this quest to the tower is important in some kind of like world-saving way, then is the book saying that therefore sacrificing Jake necessary, right? That feels weird, right? I think that being true feels weird. So I do think that there is some ambiguity being introduced to that, of like, this is repetition. So this is information we already know. We already got this. Walter, we don't need this. And so was sacrificing Jake truly necessary?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I start asking questions like, are we being misled? Like,
Sure,
are these the kind of prophecies where we're going to go through the book and think that events X, Y, and Z referred to these cards, and then realize like, oh no, we need to change our perspective on things and realize that that's not actually. I mean, there's other authors that play with this idea where like somebody is really confident that a prophecy means a certain thing, and it turns out that it meant the opposite or something different.
Yeah, I mean, what a perfect way to manipulate a person, right?
Yeah. And also the text even says, I don't remember the exact quote, but it's something along the lines of like, the Man in Black probably threw some lies into all this stuff that he said during this conversation.
Right,
and we have no idea where and which words and which lines. So
yeah, and like you wonder a lot about, like, we read a lot of books and we talk about a lot of books, and one of the conversations you and I continually have is like, are we supposed to take everything at face value in this part of the book? Or are we supposed to be doubting some of this information?
Yeah.
And what King is doing here is introducing textually the idea that you might should be doubting some of this.
Yeah. Right. I agree.
So the 4 cards surround the Gunslinger's hangman on each of the corners of the card, and the 6th is placed right on top of Roland's. It is the tower. Roland demands to know what it means that the tower is placed on top of him, but the Man in Black will not say, maybe because he just doesn't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Who knows?
Yeah. The 7th and final card is the card of life, but also not for Roland. Death was not for him, but life is not for him as well. It is described as a sun rose in a luminous blue sky. Cupids and sprites sported about. Below the sun was a great red field upon which it shone. Roses or blood, the gunslinger could not tell. Perhaps, he thought, it's both. So again, we go back to the Oracle's prophecy again, where she mentioned roses. So that seems important.
Yeah, I'm sure this will all become clear in several thousand pages.
Yeah, sure. The Man in Black does not show Roland where the card fits in the pattern, but he just burns it up in the fire instead. So that seems significant, right? Like, where does that fit on the cards on the floor? Like, we know life is not for him, but death was not for him either, and it still got laid on the field. So what does that mean?
Yeah, I don't know. Also, like, I don't know, like, if this is like a standard tarot reading or if this is just the Man in Black doing things randomly. Like, these motions, they do seem to be. He did say this is his own form of tarot that he has made up, so he can do kind of whatever he wants.
Yeah, some of these cards are real, some of them are not. I don't want to go into which are which, but that is absolutely true. Yeah. Some of these are real tarot cards. Some are made up.
Okay.
So we finished the tarot reading, and I just want to pause for a minute to talk about prophecy, because the book is driving home the importance of prophecy again. And as we already talked about here, it's repetitive. Roland learned this information already, but here it is again.
It's very curious that the Man in Black is doing any of this at all, right? Like, he wanted Roland to chase him and to be psychologically destroyed in doing so. And now that he's been caught, or allowed himself to be caught, he wants to give this prophecy. And since we've seen most of this prophecy before, we know that it's probably true in some sense, although it's vague and underspecific. So this is all either playing into his hand or part of some like preordained like thing that he has to do. Like he mentions a few times, like, I have to do this because that's the rules. Yeah. And we don't know what that means either. He could be lying too. He could be lying and saying like, oh, I have to tell you this, when really he just wants to tell him this because it's part of his trap. Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, I think it's interesting because, like, a little bit later he says, I am compelled to tell you partially because of the sacrifice of the boy and partially because it is the law, the natural law of things. Water must run downhill and you must be told. And it's so interesting, like, that he literally bargained for what is happening right now with Jake's life. But only partially.
That's what he's implying, right? Or more than implying. And that's one of those things where I'm like, well, that could be a lie actually, but
yeah, sure.
But, it could also be that was a magical sacrifice. Like, you sacrifice a life and then you get a boon. I don't know. There's so much. I feel like I'm saying I don't know too much, but I don't know. So
I mean, this is one of those I don't know chapters.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what we talked about at the top. It's just going to be kind of weird, but
yeah.
Walter reveals to Roland that he is not the great one you seek, but merely his emissary. And then he tells him to go to sleep. And he quotes Shakespeare saying, "Perchance to dream."
Yeah.
Another fun Our World reference.
Not surprising that the Man in Black knows that reference. And also we've just seen so many references at this point, but also like that reference is specifically a metaphor where sleep means death and dream means you wind up in heaven or in hell, rather than the oblivion that you seek.
Yep.
So I just thought that was fun because it seems like it's more than just a clever, like, I know Shakespeare.
Right. Well, I mean, it's Hamlet, right? It's
Yeah.
Hamlet contemplating killing himself.
Yeah.
And the reason why he decides not to do it is because he fears what happens after death.
Exactly.
There's a lot of weight to this. A lot of weight to this. So we cut to that dream in which the Man in Black basically shows Roland the creation of the universe, like starting with the earth and light and then basically we go kind of almost go through Genesis a little bit.
Yeah.
And then we pull back again and again until we're worlds and nebula and universes out. And then he screams, "Let there be light." And there's just like this overpowering, almost maddening amount of light. And I think we're kind of forced to remember the moment back in Tull where one of the rumors of what was out here past the desert was like what we called the deadlights at the time, which is a it reference, but this overpowering light that drives men crazy.
Yeah, but it doesn't drive Roland crazy.
No.
Which
he barely survives. Barely.
Yeah, that like to me that struck me as like, well, maybe this is one of the things about Roland that's special is his mind is so slow that something that would destroy a normal person just kind of it aggravates him and then he gets over it.
Yeah, I think Walter says if I showed that to your father, he wouldn't have survived.
Right.
But you do. And so they talk about what Roland saw as the light grew so bright, it was almost maddeningly blinding. And what Roland saw was a single blade of purple grass. And I love this because the Man in Black says like he's excited about learning what he saw because he's never seen it, which again is another beat of us showing how kind of ignorant our antagonist is in all of this. He's going through the motions, but he does not have all the answers. He does not understand it all himself.
Right. Like he seems so small now at this point.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
We were worried he's going to be this great wizard that he has to fight. And he just seems like this almost just this hanger on who just wants to understand this world. Like he's maybe knows less than Roland in some ways. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole blade of purple grass thing is just so interesting and unexpected and weird. Scott, like basically the Man in Black has somehow given Roland like this spiritual insight into the nature of the cosmos. This is another thing I didn't expect to happen in this book. It's just so trippy.
Yeah. And he carries that on with this kind of discussion about size and how our entire universe could exist on that one purple blade of grass, or 1,000 universes could exist on thousands of single blades of grass.
Yeah.
And he says, the greatest mystery of the universe offers is not life, but size. Size encompasses life, and the tower encompasses size. And then he goes on to say, yet suppose further, suppose that all worlds, all universes met in a single nexus, a single pylon, a tower, and within it a stairway, perhaps rising to the Godhead itself. Would you dare climb to the top, Gunslinger? Could it be that somewhere above all of endless reality there exists a room? So it seems that the Dark Tower is like literally the center of everything.
Right.
And almost like this answer to the question about size. What is bigger than the Earth? What is bigger than the galaxy? What is bigger than the universe? The answer to all these questions is the tower.
Yeah. I think it's really like clever writing that he's the word size, right? It's such a simple, almost like childishly simple word, but it's the perfect word too, because it's like size is the concept of relating the size of two things, and you can always have something bigger, and you can always like there's no limit to it, right? It's just it's having trouble grappling with what I'm trying to say exactly, other than it's a really weird and abstract concept, and so it's very clever of King to just hang it all onto a very simple word and then kind of load that word with all of this meaning that he wants to put onto it.
Sure.
Yeah, like the directness of this as a way for King to lay out his cosmology is actually just shocking.
Yeah.
Especially after this whole book of subtle cues and like ambiguous hints, just having the man in black be like, this is how the universe works.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the idea that all the worlds come together in the tower, right? So whether this is multiverse, whether Roland's on a different world than ours or just on a different time of our world, it doesn't matter. It all comes together in this one place. So every Stephen King book, every other book, every story, every existence, every version of everything all comes to a nexus at the Dark Tower.
Yeah. And, you know, you begin to understand why you might want to go to the Dark Tower if you know that that's what the Dark Tower is, but not necessarily. Like, like it sounds terrifying.
Right. Yeah. And like the questions that he's asking him, like, would you dare climb to the top, Gunslinger? Could it be that somewhere above all of the endless reality there exists a room? Yeah, I mean, maybe. Like, at the center of everything, there's a tower. In that tower, there's a room. What is there?
Right.
What is there? And I mean, that's an interesting question. And like this idea of what is at the center of everything? What could be there? What does that mean? But is it enough of a draw to let you murder a child?
Right.
Like that's the thing that like you're like, yeah, that would be an interesting experiment of what would be at the center of the literal universe. I guess I'll just murder a kid.
Right. Like if somebody said, you know, on this piece of paper, I've written the equation that is just like the literal, theory of everything. How much would you give for this? I'd probably give a lot for it, but I wouldn't hurt anyone for it.
Sure. But I think we have to go back to something we talked about last week with the Oracle, which is just that Roland is a person that needs answers. That's why he risks his life to go towards the Oracle, because he wants an answer to a question. And that seems to be the same thing here. The answer to what is at the top of the tower. You know what I know is going to be in that room at the top of the tower? Maybe it's like a candle with Jake's face in it, because that's what he said a couple pages ago.
Yeah. I'm still not sure if that's literally what he's going to see, but
well, I don't know if literally, but yeah, I think the message there seems to be the connection with both describing of a room at the end of the journey is this idea that even when you make it to the end of your journey, he will still be there. You will not be able to forget about what you did to him.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. A whole lot more is discussed. Walter talks of his king. And he also mentions this ageless stranger that Roland will meet before he meets his king. And he's going to have to kill that person. Yay. We also learn specifically that Walter O'Dim and Martin are indeed the same person. He never left Gilead. He just changed his appearance. And that's something he seems to do a lot, is change his appearance, change his name, change who he is. So that's that.
Yeah. I guess the meaning of that is that this guy has been hounding and prodding Roland for his whole life, which kind of implies that if this guy is an emissary of this greater dark power, then Roland has been selected for his whole life almost for this for this role or whatever it is. He's been picked out to be tortured and to be pushed into a position where I don't know. Does this dark force want him to seek the tower, or was it trying to destroy him so that he wouldn't seek the tower? It's I'm not sure which it is at this point. Yeah,
or rather, he's gonna seek the tower for the same reason that water runs downhill, right?
Yeah, I like that too.
That this is just what happens.
But so it's interesting at this point because Roland doesn't actually care about Walter O'Dim, despite the fact that Walter O'Dim is Walter, or no, what's his name? Martin, the
guy he sacrificed his mentor and his bird for, his friend,
maybe his mom. We probably like you would think that he would have this huge personal vendetta against this guy. In fact, that was kind of the basis of my like honor culture thing, but he just wants the tower. Doesn't really care about this guy. We don't really we don't really understand why the tower. Like, it's not obvious. Like I don't think I'd want to go there.
It does seem that somewhere along the way his quest changed. And we don't understand how or why.
I think you're right.
Yeah, so then Walter tells Roland, as the palaver kind of starts to wrap up, he tells Roland he must go west to the ocean and draw the three. And this is when he gives that amazing quote about, he says, this is really great. He says, "The man in black told him again that he must go to the sea, which lay no more than 20 easy miles to the west, and there he would be invested with the power of drawing. But that's not exactly right either," the man in black said, pitching his cigarette into the remains of the campfire. "No one wants to invest you with power of any kind, Gunslinger. It's simply in you. And I am compelled to tell you, partially because of the sacrifice of the boy, and partially because it is the law, the natural law of things. Water must run downhill, and you must be told. You will draw three, I understand, but I don't really care, and I don't want to know."
Yeah, I mean, it kind of answers the question of why the man in black is cooperative. It's magic. It's the power of the sacrifice.
Yeah.
And this again makes it seem like Roland is very special. He suddenly he has this power in him. He has the power of drawing, whatever that means.
Yeah, you will not be granted a power. You've always had the power. Yeah.
Yeah. So like he survives this vision that nobody else could survive, and he understands something about the cosmos that maybe nobody has understood before. And now he has special powers. So yeah.
Yep. So the palaver done, Roland finally wakes up as the sun rises, and we find out that 10 years have gone by. He's aged 10 years. As you said, his once brown hair is now kind of graying on the tips, and across the Golgotha, in the place of the man in black, is just a skeleton in a robe. So he's dead, and we'll never see him again.
Yes, totally, definitely just dead. I mean, there's a body. If there's a body, that means that they're really dead.
Sure. I mean, even like I'm okay with making a joke about that because Roland himself makes a joke about it. It's like, I don't really think this is you, like Walter O'Dim and Martin that was. I don't believe this is really you. This is just another one of your tricks. So I'm okay with making that joke as well. Yeah. And Roland breaks off his jaw. He's replacing the one he previously had because that's something we didn't say. He lost the other jaw in the mountain. And then he sets off towards the beach.
Gotta have a jaw.
Yeah. So then the book ends here with the gunslinger sat, his face turned up into the fading light. He dreamed his dreams and watched as the stars came out. His purpose did not flag, nor did his heart falter. His hair, finer now and gray at the temples, blew around his head, and the sandalwood inlaid guns of his father lay smooth and deadly against his hips. And he was lonely, but did not find loneliness in any way a bad or ignoble thing. The dark came down, and the world moved on. The gunslinger waited for the time of the drawing, and dreamed his long dreams of the Dark Tower, to which he would someday come at dusk and approach, winding his horn to do some unimaginable final battle. So that's the end of the book.
Yeah. It's funny how, like, at this point, I just take it literally that he's eventually going to come to the Dark Tower at dusk and approach with a horn, and I'm going to understand what that means.
Well, he doesn't have a horn, remember?
He doesn't have a horn, but somehow
presumably he's going to get a horn.
He's going to get a horn.
Yeah.
Like, just to pick out one detail here, I feel like King's having a lot of fun with this idea of drawing because, like, you draw cards from a deck, you draw pictures. A drawer is as a container, but like a drawer is somebody who draws. Yeah. So he's thrown enough connotations in here that we really have no idea what to expect when it comes to what a drawer is or what drawing is, and I think that King is doing this kind of thing intentionally, and he does it over and over again as he plays with the ambiguity of concepts and words in his book. Like, even when he says Roland is a matricide, and then he refuses to clarify this at all for the rest of the book. Like, like so much of the story is about kind of forcing you to ask questions, and then the answers you get when you get them are just ambiguous riddles or like half an answer where you're like, well, that doesn't really tell me what happened. Yeah. Also, like the prophecies he's handed, where you're like, okay, that doesn't really clarify anything. So, just as we cap off this book, I wanted to say that I think really a lot of the thematic work being done in this book surrounds this idea of leaving you kind of unsatisfied or playing with your expectations in various ways. Yeah.
Well, and the interesting thing to me is, I mean, with all of Roland's past, we, the reader, still don't know. There's a lot to fill in there. But a lot of the future, the quest, we have the same information that Roland does. And yet all this stuff, we hear it and we're like, wait, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What do you mean? What are we supposed to do? Like, what?
Right.
And yet to Roland, it's like, okay, got it.
Yeah.
And like he has the certainty, like the same certainty that led him to believe without a shadow of a doubt that he is going to catch up to the Man in Black is also in this moment making him absolutely certain that he is going to get to the tower.
Right.
That this is going to happen. He's going to draw the 3, and with the 3, he's going to do the next phase of the quest, and then the next, and it will eventually, inevitably, get him to ride up on the tower.
Yeah. I mean, I just kind of jokingly said, gotta have a jawbone, but the first jawbone he took, he just kind of took on a whim, and then he ended up using it in a way that again felt completely intuitive. And now he's taking another jawbone, and now I'm forced to say, like, yeah, he's totally going to use this for something important. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taken it. Like everything he does is from this intuition of just what to do. And like you say, this is either his magic or what makes him special.
Yeah. Or just a rather interesting interpretation on how prophecy, on how destiny can drive you to do horrible things.
Yeah, true.
Because like if you are believe that you are destined unquestionably to get to the tower, then every choice that leads you closer to that tower must be the correct choice, right? Always.
Yeah, just it's Ka, man.
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah.
So that is it. That is the end of the Gunslinger. We did it. One book down.
Awesome.
We're a seventh of the way through the story now. That's not true at all. The other books are way, way longer.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, we'll be done in no time.
Yeah, no, not at all. Oh my gosh. But one thing I want to talk about before we move on to our end of the show stuff is next week, our episode is not going to jump into the drawing of the 3, which, spoilers, that's the name of the next book, Matt. So that's going to happen.
I get it.
We are not going to move right into the drawing of the 3. After we finish every book in the series, we are going to have an episode that's just us talking about the book as a whole, looking back on the entirety of the plot and the themes and what the book is doing. It's going to be kind of weird for this one because this book is so short that we've only been talking about this book for 3 weeks. So it was very easy to kind of like look at the book holistically. But the later books, I think this is going to be more important for our examination because like the 4th book is like 900 pages long, and it's going to be 12 weeks of us talking about that book. So having an episode at the end that kind of brings it all together is going to be more important. But we're just going to establish this here. So next week's episode will be about the Gunslinger as a whole, and then we'll move on to the to the drawing of the 3.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, so let's move on to Matt's
musings.
Is that are we going to do that?
No,
is that what we're going to do?
Just this week. It's Matt's musings.
Okay, we're going to change it every week.
We're going to change it every week because there's no word that works here.
Sure.
So prediction number 1 is we're going to see Jake again in some form.
Okay.
Have your laughs.
I'm laughing.
Prediction number 2 is Roland honor killed his mother, which it's interesting that I'm making predictions that are about things that happened, but I think that's kind of the fun element that we have is that the backstory is treated as a mystery in a way where we're going to find out about it via flashback at some point, I'm sure. So I'm going to make a prediction that we're going to find that out.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's fair to do because I think that the structure of the novel has both mysteries in the future and mysteries in the past.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
Let's get a spreadsheet going for you on this one.
Okay.
All right. So moving on into our audience discussion section, the question we asked last week was, after 3 chapters of this book, do you like Roland? Why or why not? And then our question for this week is going to be, how about now? That's not true. But we've got a lot of good answers here. I love seeing y'all's answers. So we'll start first with Calinero, who says this discussion question is tough because it's really hard for me to separate out my knowledge of Roland throughout the later books. That's fair. I think I'll simplify it by saying that I do like Roland. I definitely like him as a character because he's pretty fascinating. I also think I like him as a person, which is weird because he's actually pretty shitty a lot of the time. I think it's just hard for me to read how beaten down he is and see flashes of his humanity without feeling both sympathy and empathy and wishing he could be better. I'll leave it at that for now. Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah. I remember something I said last week, I think, where I was like, I empathize with him too much to hate him, even though what he's doing is terrible.
Yeah. Calinero then goes on to discuss the nursery rhyme from chapter 2. It's actually a really interesting post. You guys should go to reddit.com/r/doofmedia and check out this post. It's really good. He talks about the nursery rhyme and how it demonstrates another kingism, King, when he writes, accurately demonstrates like kind of the messiness of the human thought process. And he goes on to point this out, many other instances of King novels that he does this. And there's this part of this I really liked. It comes up in a lot of his works. It already has twice in this book alone. It is, I would argue, one of the larger reasons that King's work often shows up in r/men writing women. He is not afraid to plop us into the perspective of a character and let us sit with their thoughts, as rancid, offensive, or nonsensical as they might be. The Way Station is a great example of it. We see the way Roland's mind wanders, staggers even, much as he is physically staggering through the desert. The way the rhyme haunts him should feel very familiar to anyone who has had something stuck in their head or had intrusive thoughts. It doesn't just show you what Roland sees or describe what he's doing. He puts you in Roland's head, which is sometimes an unpleasant place to be, but works wonders in getting you to connect with his characters. And he goes on to describe other examples in the books Firestarter, Misery, and Storm of the Century. It's a really great point, though. I want to make sure we pay attention to the ways in which King gets us into the heads of our characters going forward.
Yeah, it sounds like a great post. It's also interesting how, like, reminding me that he had that nursery rhyme stuck in his head while he was stumbling through the desert takes on a different connotation now that we understand that there like something more sinister went on between him and his mom, and it wasn't just like a comforting memory.
Yeah, totally.
Next post was from Terranome. They say, do I like Roland? Maybe. It's hard to say right now, as so far he hasn't really done anything to make me dislike him necessarily. Yes, he killed an entire town, but there was cause for that. Yes, he performed abortion by gun, but again, there seems to be good reason for that too. Yes, he comes across as aloof, but then stays in town with Alice for far longer than someone dead set on catching a fleeing target would. But just as there doesn't seem to be anything that would really make me dislike him, so far I'm not really coming up with a lot that would make me like him either. He does seem to care for Alice and Jake. It's his reaction to and care for the latter that makes me lean most toward liking him as a character. He could have easily just left Jake to rot at the way station, which would have been a bit of a dick move after eating all of his food, but he took the boy on and seemed genuinely interested in his well-being. At least until the end of chapter 3, when we see Jake reduced down to just a pawn in Roland's mind, something to be used in his quest to catch the men in black. This kind of offsets any goodwill he had gained in my liking of him from taking the young boy on. So yeah, if it's not too much of a cop-out of an answer, maybe, at least at this point, I have no doubt that would change.
Yeah.
That's very similar to how I felt. I think I leaned more toward liking him, and even just remembering how complex he is makes me like him a bit more, because it's like, how can you hate someone who you recognize in yourself so much?
Sure. Up next, we have Vulgar Power, who says, I first read Dark Tower when I was 13. I, at the time, was also constantly watching Clint Eastwood movies with my father, so my immediate view of Roland was this all-knowing magical cowboy badass that knew what was up. Rereading this book at 32, I definitely see him differently. He seems like he is following this, well, prophecy says I have to do this, so I must follow my fate type of character trait, which I dislike. I much more prefer the screw this, I can rewrite my fate type of character these days. Yeah, I think that's fair. And I don't think that's going to make you hate Roland throughout the entire story, but he definitely does seem to be that type of character.
For sure. Yeah, looks like it to me too. Megafire says, I am entirely new to this story and I find Roland to be quite interesting so far. I can't help but think of him as the hardened desert he was introduced walking through, emotionally barren and hard, but with a sense of life waiting to burst through the cracks if given the opportunity. Jake was that opportunity, that bit of rain that made Roland flourish, albeit cautiously. You touched on this when they exited the desert and the sense of joy that came with it. So it made me really sad when Roland decided to suffocate and suppress this life inside of him by depersonalizing Jake. That said, I think there's still hope for him and that life is still there, and I'd be extremely surprised if this is where his wrestling with these emotions ends already.
But what if Megafire, what if he throws that life down into a pit?
Yeah, I mean, obviously his arc is not like over, right? But
oh yeah, well, yeah,
but I get what Megafire is saying here.
Sure.
I still hope that he finds some way of, I don't know, getting to a better place. I don't even know what I want to happen. It's such a weird place to be.
maybe the line of success is just by the end of the series, he will choose not to throw a child to their death.
Maybe.
I don't know. Up next, we have Sarah Penguin, who says, I have no idea if I like Roland. For everything he does that makes me like him, he will do something to make me dislike him. With Brown, he thinks about murdering the man offering him shelter and food, then offers to pay for the water, then goes back to the murder idea. While in Tull, he has so many misogynistic thoughts, descriptions, but he stays around when Allie asks him, which suggests fondness when it is apparently so important to chase the man in black. He saves lives by stopping the cook, but that is then framed like this was the wrong choice. It feels like the objection he has is more than just capital punishment as a public spectacle is bad. He loves Jake and cares for him, but when a sex demon says if he keeps going, Jake will die, he keeps going. The fact he hides how he feels from himself makes it hard to get a good read on him. So the man in black is so important. Jake being sacrificed is fine, but not so important. He stops having sex with Allie.
Interesting.
That's a fair point. Fair point.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's kind of the struggle we've seen between humanity and Ka, if you will. I like that framing. It just kind of came out of my mouth randomly, but it is like he's struggling between his human side and the side that is dominated by fate.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, I also think like like we talked about earlier, he makes these horrible, awful decisions like when they're thrust in front of him. Like if the man in black was standing at the front of Tull and saying you can stay with Allie or you can chase after me, he probably would have just ran after the man in black. But like the distance, the not crushing presence of him and the crushing presence of his quest slipping through his fingers forever allows him to maybe stop and smell the Allie.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Jen says neutral here. I read the whole series a few years ago. I plan to reread it in light of your podcast. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I sense Roland as a programmed thing, not entirely human, moving by Ka toward the Dark Tower. As such, beyond the judgment of like or dislike. Also outside the bounds of sympathy or empathy. Given how he treats his companions, I wouldn't want to know him. If that's a measure of liking, then give it a no.
I like that. That's an interesting view on him, right? Like I think he would agree with that.
Yeah, I think
at least at this point.
Yeah, that's true. This sounds very correct to me.
Roland, did you answer the question?
Yeah.
Jen, are you Roland? Samaras says, my opinion on Roland has seesawed a lot, considering only 3 chapters have passed. He does some pretty reprehensible things, but at least according to our modern sensibilities. But I think the book is highlighting the ways in which he is a product of a very different time and place, a product of an entirely different world, in fact. So the answer to the question whether I like him or not is probably a no at this point. That being said, I do like him as a character, just not very much as a person. He's probably one of my favorite characters in all of fiction, actually. The reason for which I'm sure will be discussed further as the story progresses. Yes. I don't want to diminish his good sides because they definitely exist. However, if I take both the good and the bad, they don't seem to really balance out. I think it is apparent that he's lived a harsh life and has consequently become a harsh person. He still has a conscience, but feeling bad about the things you do does not absolve you of your actions, especially when you have no intention of changing. That is very true.
Yeah.
That makes me think back of the moment where he's like, every time I do this, every step on my journey always ends on the killing field.
Yeah.
And he kind of throws his hands up at that. It's like, there's nothing I can do. But it's like, no, you can. You can.
Yeah. It's interesting because just reading these answers has made me more excited about learning more about this character, because I feel like King definitely is putting us in this place on purpose, which makes me ask, okay, well, what does he have in store for us then?
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Excited.
All right. The discussion question for next week is talk about how Stephen King uses the concept of prophecy to reflect the themes of this novel. And I'll leave you guys to kind of pull those themes out. I don't think there's a wrong answer here as far as that regard. If you are a constant reader, please just keep it to this book. Don't spoil anything beyond the Gunslinger, please. And that's just a general rule for all your answers to all these questions. Please only spoil up into whatever has been talked about in the episode the question was asked.
Yeah, I understand that may be difficult, but from where I'm sitting, for all I know, these prophecies are all lies. So somehow you have to contain the meaning of the prophecies to just this book and what they mean within this context.
Yeah, and just the idea of prophecy in general, I think as well.
Yeah.
So, All right, that is it for us here on Kingslingers this week. We will be back next week with a brand new episode looking back at all 5 chapters of the Gunslinger. We're going to talk about the whole book. We've never done this before, Matt, so I don't know what the show format's going to look like, but we're going to do it.
Yeah, I imagine it'll be rather more freeform than this, but
I think it will. Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah.
Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter @doofmedia.
Yes, that's where you can submit your discussion questions at kingslingerspod@gmail.com. I forgot to say that. Or we do have a subreddit that's r/doofmedia where you will find each and every one of these episodes and you can leave comments on there or on YouTube. That too.
Yeah.
Speaking of YouTube, if you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so and make sure you never miss an episode. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, pretty much anywhere else. Apparently the Pocket Cast issue is all sorted, so it's there as well.
Yeah. If we're not on a platform, then fuck those guys.
If we're not on a platform, email me because I'll put us there.
This Friday, we are doing a live book club, live stream, interacting with you folks on the book Children of Time.
Yeah, this is, I think we have some people who have never listened to a Doof Media podcast before listening to this show, which is great. We're happy to have you. Really excited to have you guys. We do a monthly book club, the last Friday of every month, where we do a live stream on our YouTube channel and just talk about the book for a couple hours. And it's really fun. It's one of my favorite things to do. And we interact with our chat. So if you're listening to this right now, it's tomorrow. So come hang out with us.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good point. It's Friday the 31st of January.
Yep.
So yeah.
And Children of Time is a great book that by the time you're hearing this, I will be finished of. I'm not quite finished as of this recording date, but I'm getting there.
Yes. We recently did a Doofcast episode on Seven, the David Fincher movie. If you're interested in that, check that out. And yeah. If you like any of our shows and you want to support them, consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. You can donate $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. Supporting us on Patreon gives you tons of great bonuses like voting in our quarterly fan art and costume contests, hangout sessions, access to live streams of our recording sessions on occasion, and our excellent Discord chat.
Yeah, if you cannot afford to donate right now, that is absolutely okay. You can help us out by sharing this podcast with all of your Stephen King loving friends and family, all of them, or just randomly on all your social media. Just tweet that shit.
Yeah.
We love tweets.
Yeah, print out posters and tape them on light posts and stuff too.
That would be weird, but yeah, you can do that.
Yeah.
Or you can just help us out by leaving us a rating and a review. This week's spotlight review comes from Logslow, who gives us 5 stars and said, "The bad boys of close reading literary analysis podcasting are back," which is the greatest title of a review I've ever seen. If you've listened to any other Doof podcast, I'm sure you know what you're in for. If you haven't and just love The Dark Tower, you're in for a treat. Scott Daly, a longtime Stephen King fan, and Matt Freeman, a complete newbie to the series, have been analyzing and dissecting literature with precisely this dynamic for literal years. I can't believe that's true, but it is literal years.
God.
The commentary is always fresh and insightful, and their differing perspective explore what the books communicate clearly on the first pass and what takes a fuller understanding to really appreciate. So join Matt and Scott as they eagerly dive into and discuss Stephen King's midworld of sinister men in black, poetic descriptions of horrible creatures, and animalistic frenzy-based undeath powers. Thank you, Logslow. We really appreciate that review. And thank all of you out there who take the time to leave us these rating and reviews. I'm watching that number go up, and I love to see it. It really means the world to us, and it really does help us out a whole bunch.
Oh, this is such a delightful review. This is hilarious.
I love it.
Yes, thank you so much, Logslow.
All right, folks, we will see you back here next week for our discussion of the Gunslinger as a whole. We're going to wrap up the Gunslinger and then prepare to move on to the next book in the series. So we'll see you then. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.